This is my monologue on Anarchism and David Friedman's interview analysis. I want to let you know what the general topics I would like to cover. It's pretty ambitious and I'm not sure I can do all of it, but I'll do what I can. In the first place, I'd like to mention that in his interview, I created some extended remarks, and I will refer to them, but you can refer to them in writing. First, my analysis of the interview and my explanation of the problems that exist with anarchism, which explain why I'm not an anarchist. And they're pretty extensive. And they have the premises that I use to come to the conclusions. And when somebody wants to disagree, they should answer the questions of which premises they disagree with and which they don't. The other things that I would like to cover on this monologue is the philosophic underpinnings of the various topics that are in the analysis, such as ultimate value, principles, the idea of individual rights and government. How do those concepts and those ideas fit in a general view of your knowledge and your understanding of the world and life, etc.? And what I'm referring to here is a basic principle which I notice a lot of people have not grasped, which is the hierarchical aspect of knowledge. Knowledge is hierarchical, meaning some conclusions are the base for others. You could think of it as a 5-story building, and you have a foundation, a first floor, a second floor, a third floor. And in order to make sense and have proper conclusions, first of all, you should know where the foundation is and start at the foundation. And that's something that I noticed nobody does in these discussions that I have with people. And it's often the source of disagreement. So I'm going to try to address that here with the various topics that I cover in my analysis. And so this is one of the other things I'd like to achieve if possible. I'd like to cover, of course, the analysis that I did of David Friedman's interview. If possible, anarchist anger, which I think is justified. And I think that that is what sometimes clouds the capacity to think. The propensity to use insults and start a discussion with insults. If you notice, in my discussion with David Friedman, we don't insult each other. And unfortunately, insults have become common on the internet, and people act that way because they're not going to get punched in the face because you can't reach them. They don't use their own name. It's a horrible situation which was made worse by President Trump, who engages in insults. This is not the climate or the procedure for optimal results in discussing a complex, difficult topic. Like, what is the optimum political theory, which is the disagreement that I've had with many anarchists. I suggest that you look at the debates that I've had and also the interviews so you can see more in depth the various points that I make. But I'll try to cover that as well. You notice that I did an interview or a monologue on secession of Catalonia. This I did mainly for the sake of anarchists, because I think the solution for anarchists is to secede and to move to a particular area where they can try out their experiment and see if it works. A no government zone. To my surprise, hardly any anarchists are interested in doing this. They prefer to complain about the present situation and expect the other people that think that their rights will be more in peril under anarchism just to give up and say, okay, we'll just accept anarchism. And that's not going to happen unless so you have to either persuade the other people, and in a large society like United States, you aren't going to have a chance to persuade every person. So if you persuade enough people, you could have your own anarchist zone, which is what I would like to have. If I could have a limited government zone, I would do that in a heartbeat. And I tried to start this process when I started the Free State Project with Jason, which was a first step towards that goal. If I could have, if I would move to a territory within the United States and like-minded people that believe in limited government, if we could secede, that would be great. Then we would see if that experiment works well. I'm very confident that it would. Anyway, I've apparently already covered some of the latter topics, but regarding this issue of whether you can have a country or society where the law of the government applies to everyone and it doesn't apply to everyone, obviously that's not possible. So the only solution is to secede, to separate, to live in different territories, in different zones, in a different place. And then you can have a zone with no government and try it out. I'll try to identify some of the reasons why I think that you will have less protection of your individual rights under that scenario. So, let's start with the analysis of David Friedman's interview. He thinks that, let's do some backtracking here as far as where does the whole issue of ultimate value come from, which is something I haven't discussed before. When people began to think about values and principles rationally, like the Greeks did with Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, they noticed that we human beings, and you can notice through introspection or introspection, you can notice in other people, implied, that people have purposes in life. So they have a purpose, like they go to the grocery store. So why do they get in their car and go to the grocery store? Because they have an end. They want to buy some food. So the end is the food, the means is the traveling to the grocery store. But then they also notice that when they drive back with the food, that's a means to another end, which is to cook the food, which is a means to eat the food, which is a means to other values, such as enjoyment and health. So in life, we see that there are these means and sequences. Now, the Greeks realized, and anybody who thinks about it, that in order for any of these ends the intermediate ends to have any value, it has to be leading to something at the end of the chain. That is ultimate value. That's what the Greeks call the supreme good, which gives value to all the other things that were done before. That's how it's infused in the other actions and makes the other actions make sense if they've chosen a proper ultimate value. But it's clear that if you have a means end sequence ad infinitum leading nowhere, then nothing you're doing is worthwhile. If you have circular and means ends sequences just going around in circles, that doesn't make any sense and means that takes away the value of anything you're doing. It's for nothing, because ultimately it's for no ultimate good. So if you think about it, that's where the whole subject of ultimate value comes from, and that's why the Greeks were searching for that, and they wanted to identify what is the supreme good that makes all the other things worthwhile. When people talk about what is life purpose, they're referring indirectly to this situation. So they're implicit is they're trying to determine why they should do the things that they're doing, what makes it worthwhile. And that is where the whole idea and issue of ultimate value comes from. So it's not that you just start talking about ultimate value for no reason. This is the process that went in before. Now, in order to make everything worthwhile, you have to identify the right ultimate value. I've said that a long, happy life is what I think should be your proper ultimate value. And that's an interesting discussion. I actually wrote an essay on that subject. But to think that you can have different contradictory ultimate values is, like David Friedman, is not to understand the topic. And often he will say, well, freedom is both an end and a means. Well, yeah, everything before the ultimate value is a means and an end, and then that end becomes a means to something else. But the difference is that the ultimate value is an end, but it's not a means to anything else. It's not, you don't try to achieve a long, happy life for some other reason. It is it's an end in itself. And obviously he doesn't grasp that, so he thinks it's fine to have no ultimate value, and worse, to have contradictory ultimate values. So, for example, one of his ultimate values is the greatest good for the greatest number, which implies he will have to sacrifice himself to other people. And on the other hand, his own happiness, which means if he's rational, that he's pursuing his rational long-term self-interest, which was another problem because I don't think he integrated the fact that you have to consider the long-term consequences of your actions and the implications. But anyway, those two are clearly contradictory. They can't both be true. And that's another fundamental in philosophy and in your hierarchy. In order to identify proper conclusions about anything, you have to have a proper epistemology. In order to have a proper epistemology, you have to adhere to logic. If you contradict yourself, you're necessarily mistaken, and you don't know what the truth is, but you know for sure you have a mistake in your thinking. And when I interviewed him, that's clearly revealed. Now, I didn't prove what the ultimate value should be because I'm not giving a monologue or a lecture on ultimate value. But I did prove that he's mistaken. And that's the beginning, because you're not going to really be interested in anything until you say, look, I got a problem here. I'm mistaken. Okay, so this is now ultimate value. In other words, what should be your ultimate value is premised on some more fundamental conclusions about human nature. And so the hierarchy is, first you have to identify facts about human nature, what their needs are, their physical needs, their intellectual needs, their emotional needs. If you want to have a clear understanding of what should be your ultimate value, it has to lead towards the satisfaction of those needs that human beings have. And you have to be right on those conclusions. So the hierarchy is, first you have to understand human nature. And a lot of these discussions, that's what I try to lead them to. What is your conclusion about human nature and our needs? And based on that, we can come to the proper conclusion as to what should be the ultimate value, and then a proper conclusion about what principles you should follow if you want to achieve your ultimate value. And those are the principles, those are ethical principles, like being productive, being rational, acting in a way you can be proud of yourself. When he starts to interview me, it's clear that he doesn't understand the implication of the relationship between my principles and values and my ultimate value. My ultimate value is to have a long, happy life. The purpose of the principles is to give me clarity and guidance in achieving that ultimate end. That's why I adhere to those principles. That's what validates those principles. They are means to an end. Like freedom is a means to an end. To be rational, to pursue knowledge is a means to an end. He doesn't realize this, and then he introduces a value or principle that just confuses everything, like not lying, because actually honesty is a very complicated principle, and there are clear exceptions to when you should be honest and when you shouldn't. And the optimum is not to always tell the truth. When you have a gun, when the Nazi has a gun to the Jew's head, he shouldn't say he's a Jew. That's an obvious. When you're playing poker, it's one of the agreements is it's fine to lie. So you have to understand the context of when lying is proper and when it isn't. And if you want to have a perfectly refined principle on honesty, you would include all those caveats. And it isn't a simple principle, and that's why I usually stay away from it, because it just creates a lot of complications. But the other principles are pretty clear. And for example, human beings, in order to survive, they really only have three choices. Either they produce and trade, which is the proper choice, which is to be productive, and which is facilitated by social living, because you can trade. If you live on a desert island, you can't trade, at least not directly, unless over the boat or the airplane lands there. So the other options are to be a predator or to be a beggar, and that's it. So given life in society, the right choice is to be productive and to trade. And that's why that's one of my principles. You will be able to satisfy your natural needs, your physical, emotional, and intellectual needs, following that principle, and therefore have a better chance of having a happy, long life. So, clearly, there's a problem in his thinking because he has two contradictory principles, and that already disqualifies you. And you don't even have to get to what is the right ultimate value, because already you know you're mistaken. And one of the problems that I identified is the problem in his epistemology, which apparently he does not grasp the function of principles, which is to give you guidance and how proper principles are applied and how you reach them. Let me give you a brief, quick understanding of how to arrive at a proper principle or any proper conclusion about anything. First, you have to start with perception. That's the beginning of knowledge. Those percepts you have to integrate into objective concepts, concepts that integrate facts of these percepts. Then those concepts, which you use words to identify, you have to be able to integrate into a proposition, a logical statement, simple. In other words, I like apples, or apples are healthy. That's a simple proposition. And those simple propositions you integrate into principles which are general. And so you can make a general principle about eating, about food that is nutritional and good for you, and you can integrate that and follow that principle of a good nutrition guideline, and that will lead to your health, and a good health will lead to your chances of having a long-term happy life. You see how it works? That is the relationship. Now, principles is not the beginning of something. So often an anarchist will say, well, I start with, it's wrong to initiate physical force. Well, that's a common sense idea, and I would accept it, but it's not a beginning. It's not where you start. And you won't understand how to apply that principle if you don't know where to start and why it was created. For example, if you live on a desert island, it's irrelevant. The whole issue of rights or government is irrelevant. The other issues are relevant. Some are relevant. Should you be rational? Yeah, you better damn be rational, because it's not going to be easy to survive. That is an ethical principle. So the whole discussion on political theory, which is the disagreement that I've had with anarchists about what is the optimum social organization. It used to be, what is the best form of government? Monarchy, totalitarianism, theocracy, or whatever. But you can introduce another option, which you have. No government at all. Fine. Call it what you want. It's a political theory about what social organization, or you could call it lack of social organization, will lead to less infringements of your individual rights, which, by the way, is where most of my discussions finish, because in order to lead anarchists to the conclusion to even think about the infringements that will occur under anarchism to their individual rights, I asked them this question: will people's rights be infringed under anarchism? And of course, they have to admit, yeah. And then they start saying, well, human beings aren't perfect and this and that, whatever. But that we already have then come to where we need to be, which is, okay, so let's compare. Under limited government, where you have more or less infringements of your individual rights. And that's what we're talking about, because fortunately, we agree that our ultimate end is not to have as least amount of infringements of our individual rights. So we have a common goal, a common political goal, a common ethical goal. So just to keep track of the hierarchy here is the fundamental field that we're talking about is ethics. A subsection of ethics is political theory or social ethics. It's just a kind of ethics. It means what are the principles that are best when there is a social organization, when you aren't two people living in a desert island or just one person, when you are living in society, in a country. So that's where the whole political theory discussion starts and where it is, and you can see the hierarchy. It is something that comes after identifying basic truths, ethical principles that apply to yourself, regardless of other people, and that will help you live a long, happy life, which is what I wish for all of you. Anyway, let's continue on this discussion of principles. One of the things that I have pointed out in my analysis is that if you have 4 or 5 different principles, which he mentioned, and you don't have one principle that tells you when you apply one principle and when you apply the other, you're not going to get any guidance. And the whole purpose of having principles is defeated. That's why when people ask me, are you willing to initiate physical force? And I say, yes, only under extreme duress. It's a caveat. Now, he also agreed that he would initiate a physical force and violate NAP, as most rational anarchists that I've discussed this issue with would, because it's clear that there is that caveat, at least. And so if you want to have guidance, act properly to achieve your ultimate end, your ultimate value, you have to know the exception to the rule, or else you don't have any guidance. If you say, sometimes I follow NAP and other times I don't, well, who knows what you're going to do? You don't know yourself. Other people won't know either. So you don't have any guidance. And that is another thing that I've tried to explain in my analysis and in my discussions with people. The purpose of a principle. And a principle, as I mentioned before, is formed in a particular context for a particular purpose and integrates a group of particular facts. In this case, the one on social ethics, which is politics, political theory, what it integrates is, if human beings are living together in society, which principles should they follow to optimize everybody's possibility of a long, happy life? And which principles should they follow? That's where the whole principle of non-initiation of physical force and of trying to achieve to have your individual rights best protected comes from. That is the context. So that's why? Because we connect it to our ultimate value. So that's the sequence. It's the hierarchy. So I have said in my debates that I think that in order to optimize my possibility of a happy life, I think the best option is a limited government. Government that is clearly limited to protecting the individual rights of the citizens, their life, liberty, and property, as is specified in the Declaration of Independence. As Jefferson said, to secure these rights, governments are instituted. And he's talking about the right to life, which is the basic right to liberty, and he uses the phrase pursuit of happiness, which it refers to what you need to be able to do if you're going to have a good life, and what a good life, a happy life, requires you to be free, not to have redistribution of wealth and other infringements of your rights like we have today in our mixed system, and which, as I mentioned before, what bothers me and also angers the anarchists, and I think to the extent where it makes it difficult for them to focus because they're so angry. That's what you have to avoid when you're under some degree of statism, or you like to use the word, anarchists like to use the word tyranny. I don't, because I reserve that for extreme amounts of statism. A mixed economy, welfare state. Well, keep your wits about you and don't sacrifice yourself, so that, and keep focusing on how you can improve your situation. And that's why I do my interviews and battle for the protection of individual rights, and why you should have a right to do with your own body whatever you want, smoke marijuana or not, or whatever, and why it's wrong to have redistribution of wealth, etc. And why it's in everybody's self-interest to limit government to just the protection of the individual rights of the citizens, not to get involved in foreign disputes, etc. So I used also to illustrate this principle that if you have multiple principles with no organizing or integrating principle that tells you when to use one and when to use another, I use my interviews on foreign policy as a good example, and people try to evade what their principle is when they're going to send military forces to other countries by enumerating several possibilities and then not giving you any principle that tells you when they're going to apply one and when they're apply another. They usually include self-defense, which is a proper principle and the only proper principle, but once they've included others and they don't tell you when they're going to apply the others, already they're disqualified because there's no guidance, there's no principle there. Of course, these other justifications are incorrect and can be addressed directly, but that's a different point. The point is, if you have several factors and you don't have any principle that tells you when to apply one factor and when another, you're in the situation of a person that's operating by whim. Who knows what they're going to do? They don't know, you don't know, whatever. So that is another issue that I went over when I did my analysis, which is in my extended comments of the interview. So one of the things that I wanted to mention regarding my view is that this whole purpose of identifying a ideal political system, which I think is a limited government, is to know what is the ideal that you are trying to approximate. So it gives you guidance. So you know whether to be in favor or against drug laws, in favor or against sending forces to Nigeria, like all of a sudden we found out we did. So this will give you guidance. If you have a clear principle, it will give you guidance. When it is right, when it is wrong. If you have several principles there, you don't know when you're going to apply one and when other, you have no guidance. This is what I've tried to explain in my discussions and interviews and debates. So I guess we can go to, well, I'm trying to make this point that what I'm trying to do is, a lot of anarchists are very upset because we don't have a perfect limited government. Well, I would like to have one too. But the whole purpose of doing this exercise of trying to identify the optimum political theory is not to be discouraged because you don't have it at the moment. It's so you know what you're shooting for, what you're trying to approximate, and making the choices that will get you closer to that ideal. It's an ideal. The purpose of an ideal is to give you some guidance as to where you're trying to go, what you're trying to achieve, what is in the right direction, what's in the wrong direction, and participate in the social debate and forming of conclusions to further that ideal without being self-sacrificial and ruining your life. There's no need to go to jail. You can work hard and within the context of your other values, make your contribution. And that's it. You don't have to self-sacrifice or ruin your life or anything else. And I don't recommend any of that. For example, if I was in North Korea or Cuba, I would not do the kind of interviews that I do. That would be stupid. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about anarchism, which was another topic. Oh my goodness, it's pretty late. I could, but it's already 37 minutes, so I'll leave. Why don't you just take a look at my debates and my interviews, and maybe some other day this whole topic is relatively complex. It deserves better treatment than I can give it in 5 minutes or at this point. So thank you for paying attention and watching, and I hope I clarified a little bit on the underpinnings, the philosophic underpinnings, the hierarchical order of these conclusions and relationships between them. And maybe that will make my position clearer and help you all in your pursuit of wisdom. That's what I hope for everyone. Tell me what you think. Bye.